Howdy guys, welcome to BRG Photography. This is Ben, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can take a simple gray background like this and using the selection brush tool along with a particular blend mode, change that color into any color you want, but most importantly, keeping and preserving all that hair detail. So to see how it's done, stay tuned. Alright guys, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to be going over in depth Affinity Photo's amazing selection brush tool and how to make really precise selection so that we can separate our subject from the background, and then using a particular blend mode, change that background color into any color we want. But what's most important about this technique is that we can preserve all of that hair detail. So you can see no matter what color I choose, those hair strands and flyaways that are usually impossible to select, we have kept them all in there and they look fantastic. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So let me just go ahead and delete this previous stuff I've done before, and we can start all over. So we have this image here that is against a gray background, and I've already retouched it, but I purposely left in all of these flyaways just so I can show you how it works in this video. Normally I would delete all these flyaways and stuff here, but for this video I left them in just to show you how you can still keep them while still changing the color of the background. Alrighty, so with that said, let's go ahead and get started. With our image here, the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and duplicate this layer. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command J or Alt, or is it Command or Control J on a keyboard? I'm on a Mac, so I think by default I just say Mac Command. So Control J, that duplicates that, and this is very important, and I'll show you why in a little bit. All right, so now with that top layer, our duplicated layer selected, we are going to go over to our selection brush tool, which is over here, and we're going to just start painting over the subject. We can get a kind of little bit bigger brush and just start painting over, and you're going to see that it's kind of automatically like snapping to the edges, which is pretty neat. We don't have to be too perfect, but we can just come in here. If we have a bigger brush, it makes kind of bigger selections. Smaller might be great for doing more precise things like that. We're going to grab the hair like so. It's important to know that, let me go ahead and delete that, is this only works on the actual pixel layer. If you have a blank layer on top and you're trying to make a selection, there's nothing for that thing to kind of anchor onto, so you can see it's not snapping anywhere. But if we do make it on the pixel layer, and right now it should be here, I don't know why it's not showing it to me, but now you can see that it's automatically selecting to that pixel layer. Now if we go a bit too far like that, we can hold down the Alt or Option to basically subtract from this and basically reel it back in, and we can go back into painting over here. And this is pretty good. Now I'm not going to be too particular about this hair part because we are going to be fixing that with the refinement step right now. Also, we can see here there's a little gap right here, but I'm going to fix that later. But for the most part, we want to do a pretty good job of getting a nice selection that looks good. All right, so with that, we are going to come up here and press this refine key. And we are going to be presented with the refine selection little menu and the little pop-up menu. All right, so by default, you should have all these set like this, and your adjustment brush should be set to matte by default. And what that's going to do is, what you're going to do with your brush now is you can start painting over some of the areas that Affinity missed. So you can see, for example, here, like it didn't really select how we wanted. So by painting with our matte brush, we can just paint over like this. And we're basically telling Affinity Photo, hey man, take one more look at that because I don't think you did a good job that first time. And it'll look at the parts that you painted, look at the background, and kind of figure out, oh, okay, I got you. This is, let's do a better job. And then you can see it did a pretty good job of selecting her hair away from the background, like so. Might come over here and get some of these strands like that. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's come over here. You can see like there's a little part of the shoulder it missed. I'm gonna go ahead and do that, fix that. And some of this part on the hair looks like it didn't do it. This is kind of hard because it looks like some of these highlights in her hair are just her hair being really light, but it's kind of confusing Affinity Photo because it thinks that it's part of the background, but we'll see how that looks in a little bit. That little patch here. Now, like I said, normally I wouldn't even be dealing with these flyaways, but I kept them in just to show you this particular technique on this video. Okay, so that looks okay. And maybe that little part here, we can just paint like that, and it should do a pretty good job of kind of filling it in. Great. All right, so you may look at this and go, all right, cool, looks perfect. We can go over here and try to fix that a little bit. And you may think, all right, cool, it's a good selection. So first, I like to double check my selection by looking at the preview and changing it to black and white. And what that does now, it shows it to me as a kind of like a mask, as if this were a mask. I'm looking at black and white. Now you can see when I zoom in, some parts it didn't actually pick up all the way for whatever reason. That part of the image kind of confused Affinity Photo, so it kind of brought in some of the background. So what we can do now is we can change our adjustment brush to foreground and paint over that. And what that does is it's basically forcing Affinity Photo to say, hey, this is the foreground, so make that white. And it's like, all right, cool. So you can see here, like it picked up a little, you can see her finger, that's where her finger is there, but it didn't, some of that red, or some of that background is bleeding into her finger. So we can do the same thing with our foreground brush selected. We can just paint over that, and that tells Affinity Photo that, hey, that's the foreground. We can go back and look at our black and white mode, and we can see it kind of fix that. And everything else seems to be okay. Maybe right here, we don't have to be too particular. Honestly, you're not going to see some of these really small details, but if you want, you can kind of do that. And cool. All right, now one thing you will notice is that when we look at it in this mode, we don't have all those little hair strands that we had earlier. So as you can see, when I go back to overlay mode, you can see all these little hair strands here. So using our matte brush, we can just start painting over some of those little strands of hair. And Affinity Photo should select those. Let's take a look really quick. Okay, like that. Now if I go back to my black and white mode, now you can see all those little hairs are selected. So we can go ahead and do that. Sometimes it's hard to see it in black and white because we can't actually see the hair. So I'm going to stay in overlay mode and just kind of paint over the hairs here. But it's also hard to see if they've been selected in this mode too because the hairs are so thin. So I just kind of go over one time with our matte brush, and then I double check it with the black and white preview mode. And I kind of feel that if you go little by little, it seems to be a bit more precise as opposed to just going over everything at once. I guess you could, but I just kind of go over each little section just a little bit at a time. And that seems to give a bit more precise selection here. So let's just see how this looked. All right, so now if I go to black and white, now we can see it did a really good job of selecting all those little individual hair strands. And I think that looks pretty good. Now it looks like here, like I said, this red is coming into her hair, but I think that this part of her hair is actually the foreground. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to the foreground mode. And you can actually do this with a keyboard shortcut. You can hold down, at least on a Mac, you can hold down the control key while you paint, and that will force the foreground brush like that. And then I think if you hold down the Option or Alt key, that is the background. So you're basically telling Affinity Photo this is the background, which we don't want to do that. And I think holding down the Command key is the feather brush. And all I was going to do is kind of blur everything, which I never really use. All right, so I think that looks okay. We don't have to be too precise because the mode that we're using. So yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if this gray is her hair or the background. We'll just kind of go with it and see how it looks, and then maybe have to make some adjustments later. I think that looks okay. It looks like I did get all this stuff here, right? All right, cool. That looks pretty good. Okay, so real quick, I can go over these sliders, but I don't actually use too much because by default it seems to be fine. But basically, matte edges on or off. This is pretty simple to see. Click it off, and you're going to see exactly what it does. It basically just makes the edges super harsh, black or white, with no variation or no gray in between. So you get a very kind of rough edge. We don't want to do that. We like having our little like gradations to really get that detail. Border width. Basically, you're basically telling how far out do you want Affinity Photo to look when it's trying to refine the selection. If we go all the way out, and you're going to see that it kind of like the background started bleeding into her eye because we're kind of giving it too wide of an area to try to like find a nice selection. You can go the other way and go way down, and that does sometimes work. Sometimes you can see we may have lost a little bit of that hair detail there, so I like to keep it just at the default 10%, and it does kind of keep all the little hair strands and everything how we like it. Smooth is pretty simple as well. Again, I never really use it, but smooth, you just go all the way, you're going to see exactly what it does. It basically just smooths out the shape of your selection. Well, we don't want to do that. We want to keep every little fine details we can. Feather, you can guess, it's just going to basically blur the edges. And again, I never use this one. And ramp is kind of interesting. Ramp, basically, if we can go down or up on this one. It starts at 0%, but we can go to -100 or +100. Basically, by going down to -100, it kind of starts forcing and pushing the background into the foreground. You can see things got really sharp here, but we lost all that hair detail. Or if we go the other way, we are kind of bleeding the foreground into the background, and you can see where, just like where our selection is kind of like growing out of that selection, so you can see it's kind of doing that. We don't want that at all. So a lot of times I don't really mess with this one. Maybe if I do, I could make an argument for going negative just to kind of like tighten up the selection, maybe get rid of some of that little like white haloing you sometimes get around your selections. But for the most part, I don't mess with it. But let's just say -3 just for now. Looks like there was a little spot. So yeah, there's a spot here, but once a selection comes, you're never going to even really see this, but we can come over here and paint white to make sure. Be careful when you have things like jewelry, earrings, necklaces. A lot of times that will confuse the Affinity Photo selection brush, and you'll have these patches in the middle. All right, and we talked about the adjustment brush, so we're good there. All right, so output. So this is also very important. We're going to output this as a mask. Okay. Now we do have this option to do new layer with a mask, but I've noticed that sometimes that creates these kind of weird artifacts. I'm not sure if it's a bug. Who knows? Maybe they fix it in the new version. This is version 1.10 I'm using right now, but I haven't tested it. But for now, I just keep things as a simple mask. We are going to hit apply. And now if we look here, it's going to give us our mask attached to that above layer, and we can look at the mask right there. That looks fine to me. All right, now here's the fun part, and here's the easy part, is with the layer below selected, our first, I guess, our original layer, we are going to go to layer, new fill layer. And that's going to create a new fill layer behind our mask. And by default, it's set to normal, and we can choose any color we want. And, you know, to be honest, it does look pretty good. You can see here, it did a pretty good job of keeping that hair. It's a little rough in certain edges, but it did a pretty decent job. Now, what the trick is, not really a trick, I guess, but blend modes are extremely powerful in this kind of stuff, because what I like to do is switch this from normal to a soft light blend mode. Now, your color will drop its saturation and intensity a little bit, but this is where you're going to see like really detailed separation from the background with all that hair. Now, this is really important. The reason why we duplicate this layer is because these hairs behind is actually part of the background. If I turn that off a little bit, you're going to see that that detail goes away, and it's really rough and kind of like not exactly the way you want it to look. But by having our original layer below the fill layer, and with the fill layer being set to soft light, some of that detail from the underneath layer is being shown through the soft light fill layer, and allowing us to keep some of this, or actually all of this really fine detail, no matter what color we pick, which I think is really, really fantastic. This is a really great way to take a solid gray background and change it and still keep all this really great detail. Another thing about this technique which is really useful is this background was pretty much solid gray, so there's not a lot of variation, but you can kind of see that the upper right part is a little darker, the bottom left is a little lighter, and soft light preserved that, where you can see there is still variation in the background, where, for example, normal, it's just a solid color all the way across, like from the top corner, bottom corner, left, right, it's all the exact same color, and it doesn't look as natural. By doing a soft light, or even overlay works as well. Soft light, we've kept that variation in the background and keeps it looking natural. So let me show you another example of that. So for example, here's another photo. This is a full body shot, but by using that soft light mode, it keeps all that texture in the background paper as well as her shadow. If we look at her mask, the mask is just this. It's just her as a silhouette. But by using that fill soft light mode, it preserved the shadow and all the kind of variations, even the little small little wrinkles and the bends and folds in the background paper. You can also use an overlay mode. Overlay mode's a bit more contrasty, so that might actually be what you're looking for. Hard light works as well, but you just get to play around to see which mode that you think works the best for your image. I found that soft light and sometimes overlay is what works the best. And then of course you can still come over here and lower the opacity of that layer to get the desired look. So you can see just like that, we are able to, as long as we have that fill layer selected, we can come back and change that color to any color we want. Maybe we want to do something kind of like, let's see, let's go ahead and grab a patch of her skin color, change that, and then maybe we can now adjust some of the saturation, maybe make it less saturation, maybe a little brighter. You know, that's kind of an interesting look, right? Then maybe drop the opacity a bit. And yeah, you can do some really creative looks to just take that kind of boring gray background and change it into any color you want. So a lot of times when I'm shooting portraits, I like to shoot against gray backgrounds because I know that it's a lot easier for me to use a soft light technique and select and do stuff like that. Now, if we are shooting against a white background in an image like this, you see here I've got my same pattern. I made my mask using the selection brush tool and you know, did all that kind of refinement stuff, got the hairs, and we have that selection, the mask above a fill layer, and we can see here our fill layer is set to soft light, but nothing's happening. You do see some little changes here, but for the most part, nothing is happening because soft light doesn't react the same way to a gray background than it does to a white background. So basically it doesn't have any effect at all. It kind of the soft light and overlay mode, they kind of ignore white. So that's not going to work. So what can we do? Well, this is where we're going to play around with different blend modes. So I have found that different blend modes like linear burn, subtract, even like darker color, not color burn, multiply seems to work. Even average seems to work a little bit. Let's just try linear burn. So you can see with linear burn, like it, now we have our colors and we can come back in here with our fill layers and we can still go through and change the colors. Now, this part here, I think it's always going to be very difficult to select hair from a completely white background because this is the image by itself. You know, hair is very thin, it can be translucent, it can be transparent, and so when you have a really bright white background like this, you know, you're going to kind of get this like patchiness of hair. So if I really want to make it really, really nice, I would probably just either delete all this or start painting in my own hair strands. But if we don't want to do that, we know that we can basically use blend modes like linear burn or even like subtract to, now subtract is interesting because subtract actually gives you the opposite color you pick. So here we have purple selected, but it's showing us green. So if we wanted something like blue, we're going to have to go to like an orange or red to kind of get that blue color we might want. And a lot of times if we're doing it's a bright white background, a lighter, brighter background is going to look more natural. It's going to be really difficult to kind of get something that's really dark. I think it's just going to look a bit odd. So by doing something like this, that might look kind of interesting. You can bump that saturation up and now we have, you know, change the background for that. Now I'm going to show you a little trick with something like this with the white background because naturally, you know, she's actually backlit. She's actually standing in front of a huge softbox. And so, you know, we can see all this white light bleeding into her skin here. Now, if we change the background to something like blue, it looks fine, but in reality, if she was standing in front of a huge blue light source, some of that blue would be bleeding into her skin. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you a little technique to do that. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to, with our top layer selected, I'm going to go to select tonal range, and we're going to say select highlights. And you can see here, it's going to kind of put this little like highlights, just selecting the highlighted parts of the image. And we are going to duplicate that layer. And now I'm going to deselect that. And we should have a layer that looks like that, where it's just selected only the highlights. And then what I want to do is, with that layer selected, I'm going to go ahead and create a recolor brush. A recolor adjustment layer. And I am going to attach it to that image, so it's just clipping on that image there. And now we can see it's put this red color just into the highlights. So what we want to do now is change that color to a color similar to the background, so it's kind of bluish, turquoise-ish blue, something like that. And we can adjust the saturation a little bit, maybe drop it down a bit so it's not so harsh. And then just lower the opacity, something like down to 20 to 10%. Let's try 15% there. And it's really, really subtle. But you can see just by adding a little bit of this blue into her skin, it kind of helps to marry, I guess you could say, it kind of helps to kind of marry her to the background, because it kind of makes it look a bit more natural. Because naturally, if she was surrounded by blue light, that blue light would be, you know, showing up in the highlights on her skin. So even like 13, 14%, I think it's very subtle, but I think it really helps. So if we do change the background, say we change the background to something like, sure, let's do a pink like that, we're going to have to come over here and change our recolor adjustment to pink as well. Let me go ahead and bring it up to 100% so we can see the color changes. And maybe something like that pink looks pretty good. All right, and now we can drop the opacity down to like 15 or 13%. And there you can see it's very subtle, but just in the highlights of her skin, we've added that pink into the background, and that just really helps bring the images together. It kind of links her with the background. It looks more natural, and that's just a neat little trick, a neat little tip that you can do there. So as you can see, this video is just a really quick way to show you how you can use Affinity Photos Selection Brush Tool to do some really cool selections, but also using blend modes to keep a lot of that hair detail and preserve background detail in an image, so that you can change this color to any color you want. And you can see the shadows are preserved, her hair is preserved, all that background detail is preserved. And we've done some really cool things to get different and interesting colors. So I think that's going to be all for this video right now, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I guess I will see you guys next time. So as always, thanks for watching, and thanks for watching. All right, later guys, bye.